Happy Sunday, everybody. Today we are looking at the re-review of the Atlas GP40 and GP39-2. All right, so we have a bit of an interesting set of circumstances that go along with these two engines, and we'll get into that in a minute. But if you have not seen the original review for these models, I would ask that you go watch that before checking this out. It's going to have a lot of the information that I'm not going to go over in this. We're not going to look at, the visuals and that type of stuff. We're strictly going to go over my experience getting these repaired from Atlas, and then some of the things I've done to make them better, more usable, locomotives. So the first thing I want to talk about is the story of getting these repaired from Atlas. Now, I realize that I have a bit of a different experience and time frame when I'm working with these models, and that can possibly affect how this situation worked out. However, I want to be upfront and tell everyone how it went. I sent these back to Atlas shortly after that review, and it was a relatively timely procedure. I'm not 100% sure at the time frame then, but it was about a 3-week turnaround time to have them look at these models. The GP40, the Montana rail link in front of you, had completely died. And the GP39, the BNSF in the back, I thought was dying. The motor was starting to give me the same characteristics that the Montana rail link did. And what ended up happening was you would have your decoder installed. The engine ran fine for a few hours, and it started to lose speed match and slow down, and eventually it got to the point where you kind of had to bump the motor to get it to start. And I tried swapping decoders. I ran NCE and a Digitrax in the Montana rail link. I thought it was the decoder failing to start with, and eventually the motor just gave up. And I thought that the GP39-2 was starting to have the same sort of issues happening. So I sent them both back to Atlas, and they came to the conclusion that yes, the Montana rail link definitely needed a new motor, so they went ahead and installed it, and they decided that there was nothing wrong with the GP39-2 other than both of my decoders had failed. So they put in a DC board and they tested it, I guess, for hours, but at this point I don't think that's the case. So they went ahead and did the warranty work and sent the models back to me, and the guy called me and told me all the information that he had come up with, and I said, okay, that sounds good, go ahead and send them back. So it took about a week to get them to me, which isn't a big deal, and I did not have the money to replace the decoders at the time. I have a pretty hefty review schedule, so it took me some time before I could afford to put the decoders in, about 3 months if my memory serves me correct. And at that time I was trying to decide if I wanted to go NCE or Digitrax, because TCS doesn't make a drop-in decoder for these micro direct type frames, the version 2 Atlas frames, as of yet. So I thought, well, I guess I'll try to look up a lock sound, and I forgot that they had lock pilots that would directly interface with these. So I picked up 2 lock pilot decoder boards. I installed them, and the engines went to running. I had really good luck running them on the lock pilot micro direct decoders. After about 2 hours, the GP39, the BNSF, started to just, have the same problems that it had when I sent it off. It started to lose speed match, and the motor started getting finicky, and after about 4 hours it had completely died. So I was a little upset because I knew what was happening. I had this exact same experience with the Montana rail link. So I reached out to Atlas again, told them that I was a little upset that I spent all this time, and you have to pay shipping back and forth on this stuff to Atlas. So, it's not the biggest gripe, but, $10 in priority mail there. And then, if I have to send it in again, that's another $10 on top of the dead decoders that happened because these motors were failing. So that's really kind of crappy in my opinion. But I was really pretty angry that I had told him exactly what was happening, and he basically said that I was crazy for saying so. There's nothing wrong with that motor. It tested fine. Well, I've done a lot of tests on electronics that have tested good and just simply didn't function. So that left me a little bit irked. Anyway, I sent him a big email about all the stuff I went through, all of the testing I did, and what I came up with. I did receive a call back from them. However, I missed it. I was at work at the time, and I tried to call back several times and never got a response back from Atlas. So poor customer service. That was not what I would consider a good experience. I decided to go ahead and spend the money out of pocket to replace the motor in the GP39. About a $40 thing to buy that online, so not a cheap fix for an already, over $100 model. So that is pretty tough to justify, but I figured I needed to do it to determine, where we were at with this. And sure enough, I get the new motor, install it. It's really easy on these new version 2 frames, no screws or anything. They just click apart, and it worked really good. Got it installed with the lock pilot, and I put 100 hours on both of them, 0 issues. So this tells me that, one, I'm not real happy with Atlas's service department, but I think these engines from right around the time of COVID, there might have been a bit of a certain time period that were more prone to issues, because these new motors that I've been getting, these new engines I have been getting, have been functioning so much better than the original experience that I've had on these. So moving forward, I think we're going to see better quality coming from Atlas, and that's going to be a good thing. They have a lot of stuff coming, but you're going to have to probably be aware that some of these, version 2 DCC ready frames out there, some of the older ones, you could have problems with. I have definitely had problems with the SD60Es. They are an older version 2 DCC ready frame, and I've brought in 2 of them now to try and get something that runs, and I'm struggling with both of them. So something to be aware of when you are looking for these. Maybe bypass them for the time being until you can start to buy new version 2 stuff from, retailers or something of that nature. I would probably stay away from the older ones. Now, when it comes to electronics, that's the other question. I spoke to Atlas at the time, and I was curious what they used for decoders on their DCC-equipped models. And so this brings in an interesting argument in price point when you were talking about these engines, because some of the new GP-ish series engines kind of looks like they're sitting in the $100, $140, and $170 price range, respectively. So $100 for a DC, $140, $130 to $140 for a DCC unit, and anywhere from $170 to $200 for a sound-equipped locomotive. And after converting these to sound-equipped, I put lock sound decoders in these, and I have an issue with that a little bit, and we'll talk about the GP39-2 in a minute here. Sorry about that. This cold's catching up to me. I had to go blow my nose. But the situation where we're talking about what is the best value, a lot of people tend to gravitate towards that DCC installed model. And after talking to Atlas, I found that from the factory, their DCC installed units are running NCE boards, versus their sound units are running lock sound boards. And honestly, other than the end user, the price for an NCE board and a price for a ESU board are almost exactly the same. I would opt to tell you to strictly stay away from any DCC equipped model. The NCE boards are just subpar compared to Digitrax, TCS, and ESU boards. I've had so much better luck with these models with these ESU boards. And so when you're looking at these and trying to determine what value is the best, the DCC equipped unit is probably not it. So you're looking at a DC unit and then spending $30 for an ESU board, or a DCC equipped, or excuse me, a DCC sound equipped model for anywhere from $170 to $200. Now, This also has kind of the same issue that I talked about with the scale trains engines. The one thing really nice about Atlas models is they come, or the version 2 Atlas models, is they come with a Sugar Cube speaker pre-installed in the fuel tank. So slotting in a soundboard just works on these models, which is really excellent. I think Atlas is the leader in the industry when we're talking about this, to be 100% honest. But if you are at all interested in ever putting sound in the unit, you're more than likely should just save your money and buy it pre-installed. So there is a difference between the soundboard that comes in these from the factory and then buying your own lock sound board. They're a little more locked down. You can only use factory files on the factory installed boards versus a lock pilot decoder can have any sound file put on it, which does have its benefits, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the price range, if these are about $100 DC, you're spending at least $90 for a lock soundboard to put in it, so you're anywhere, the $190 range. If you can get it factory equipped for $170 to $200, you're kind of still in that same price range. So you could end up saving some money by purchasing one, with the board pre-installed. So that's just something to think about. If you're at all ever curious about putting sound in it, you might just save that money and make a big investment to start with. So buy once, cry once. All right, so let's talk about the lock sound decoders and what kind of advantages you get using those. So much like all of the premium decoders out there, when you install them in a locomotive of the same type, and these I would consider roughly the same type, they use the same motor, they have roughly the same frame. All of these settings generally are exactly the same for one another. So speed matching is really easy. You can use the factory settings if you want to. I adjusted these to be a little bit of a slower engine because they're my GP models. A little snappier on the throttle up, throttle down if you wanted to, just, for switching. I have played with the throttle. I'm not sure what it is. It's controlled by CV124. It's what, your prime mover throttles up before they move. You probably saw it in the pre-review run if you checked that out. I like to showcase that kind of stuff. The sound files for these things are absolutely excellent, and getting these engines to run in a really good scale way is really easy when you're using these premium decoders. They really do work well with this particular motor and gear setup in these engines. So that's something to be noted, that when you pay for that good decoder, you really are getting premium performance out of these engines. And I got to say, it's a nice change. I really have wanted some nice GP models. There's some of my favorites. I just love GP engines. There's just something about them. They're not the strongest out there, but they can do a lot of stuff, and sometimes having the hindrance of not as much horsepower kind of makes it more fun. And I really like my GP models, so I've been hunting for good ones for quite a while, and this Montana Rail Link, I gotta say, is the standout of the two of these. It runs so good with the lock sound decoder in it, and the lock pilot for that matter as well. But I do not have a smoother GP engine than the Montana Rail Link, and it really does function like a premium engine should. So super happy with that. Now, the GP39 I've had a couple more issues with. I installed the new motor in it, and it functioned flawlessly with the lock pilot decoder. However, when I put the lock sound decoder in it, it made a lot of noise, and I'm not sure what happened there, but I ended up measuring the boards, and the lock sound board is about 1/4 of a millimeter narrower than the lock pilot board. Now, that's a small number. I'm surprised it even made a difference, but what it allowed it to do was it allowed the frame to compress just a little bit more, and the bodies fit really tight on these models. And it was allowing the body to actually touch the side of the motor as it was spinning. So that kind of worried me. I thought I had broke something, but just be aware that that can happen. And really the only thing you can do is there is a small piece of plastic, kind of a reinforcement on the inside of the body of that GP39-2. I trimmed it down a little bit and then just took my hand and lightly pulled the frame apart just a little bit. All the connections are just as good as they need to be. If you're worried about that, you can always add a little bit of solder to the contacts to kind of add some increased surface area for pickup, but honestly, it's been really good ever since. Now, when I was putting these two engines together and messing with the sound files, I wanted to try different sound files in each to see if, things would change. And honestly, the settings for throttle up, throttle down, the speed matching, all is identical, no matter what sound file you put on it, but not all sound files are equal. The sound file that I have in the GP40 is a drastically better sound file, in my opinion, than the one that I put in the GP39. Now, they both function like they should, like I said. However, the sound that comes from the GP39 just isn't totally up to the same standard that the GP40 does. So, if you're not totally excited about the sound, and I would ask that you always, or I would say you always review something before you buy it. Find someone who's done a review, because if you're not real excited about the sound on this model before you pick it up, if it's factory installed, you're probably locked into that sound for the most part. There's not a whole lot of different, say the GP40, there's 4 or 5 different sound files you could put on a lock sound. There's probably only 1 or 2 that you could put on a factory board that would still function with it. Now, there can be some different momentum settings between the two sound files. I noticed that jumping back between them, and that's easy enough to fix. If you're doing sound files, you obviously have a lock programmer at that point, so that's probably easy for you. But the one thing that I really liked about having access to multiple sound files is you'll notice this on a lot of engines when all of them have exactly the same sound file. They all spool up at exactly the same time, and you kind of get this harmony amongst all of them because they're all running the same sound file, and it doesn't necessarily sound super scale. You can change that a little bit by tweaking some of the momentum settings on those engines, like the Broadways. If they you can actually go in and tweak what speed step they throttle up and throttle down. You can kind of make them change at a little different interval. But when you're running two different sound files, the prime movers actually sound different between the two of these, and it gives it a little more prototypical sound, in my opinion. So that's a really cool option you can do when you're running the Lock Pilot decoders. So this being a rear review, it's going to be a little bit different format than normal. I basically talked about the pricing and how I felt about all of that, and these engines really do function almost flawlessly. The GP39 isn't quite as smooth as the GP40, but it's an excellent model in its own right. But what I really want to say in this re-review is, now that I've got these functioning properly, this gives me a lot of hope for what is to come from Atlas, because there's nobody that has as many GP models as Atlas does. They're going to start re-releasing all of their stuff with version 2 frames, and this is really exciting because, especially if you go back and watch the initial review on this, there are very few good older Atlas models in my opinion. I really don't like how loud and clunky they are, and honestly some of the slow speed control is shaky at best. These are pristine, and I'm so happy to finally have some really good GP models, and you probably see these a lot on my layout, mainly because I love running them. And I have been digging through Train World looking for pre-orders and stuff, and Atlas has a crap ton of stuff that's coming out in the next couple of years, and honestly their pricing is really good for sound locomotives, and that's really cool for the industry. So it gives me a lot of hope that we're going to have some really good models coming soon. So really excited for the future. This is going to be great for the customer. Us as the end users are going to start getting better deals on stuff. As Atlas starts putting pressure on these other companies to bring the pricing down, it's going to bring everybody's pricing down. And if after these have been repaired, as good as these are, as good as those GP40-2Ws I have are, if all of the Atlas models going forward are as good as those, it's going to be a game changer. So keep your eye out for those. And thanks for stopping by. Have a good rest of your weekend. Bye now.